Welcome all to a conversation with Kyle Polich. For anyone watching who's not familiar with you, please give a brief intro about what you do, Kyle.
Well, I guess what I do that's most sort of publicly known is hosting the Data Skeptic podcast and then doing some ancillary things related to that and science communication. But broadly speaking, I like to talk about my interests in AI and machine learning and statistics and how they apply to skepticism and the everyday world.
Very cool. So we're definitely going to get into the rather new app that everyone's talking about, ChatGPT, at
Oh,
the very
yeah.
end. But I mostly want to talk to you about a different subject. So
hmm
before I get into that, actually, what subjects do you generally cover on your podcast?
So our bread and butter is really something related to AI and machine learning or data science in general. We organize into seasons. So our current season is called All About Surveys, which is very self-descriptive. We go into survey methodology, different use cases, and I'll stick with that theme for a couple of months and then switch it up.
Okay. And how long have you been doing the Data Skeptic?
I think 2014, so coming up on our ninth
Wow.
year anniversary, I guess.
So have you always been a skeptic? Tell me a little bit about your transformation.
I wish I had some eureka moment or something like that, like a good story, but it was more of just, a slow drip of things and shifts in different directions. Like at an early age, I became very skeptical of religion, but felt, UFOs, those were for sure real. And I held on to that for a long time. Yeah, I mean, honestly, one of the weird cases that kind of got me to start looking skeptically, I was listening, this is before podcasts. There were hacky ways I would do things with media. Like you could find people would release their like rogue radio shows on the internet. So I'd find these files and I'd burn them to, at the time I had a CD player that would play MP3 CDs. So I could put hours and hours of content. So I'm walking around one day listening to some podcast where this guy is talking about the best photo evidence for ufology. And it's a Billy Meyer photo. And in particular, you want to go find the wedding cake UFO. And I was so happy with this. I was like, all right, if this is the best one, I'm going to get a really high definition image of this. I'm going to carry it around with me and show it to people because it's the best evidence. But if you haven't already, go Google the wedding cake UFO and a picture's worth 1,000 words.
I vaguely recall that from my days of coming out of the belief. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what is the role of data analysis? Because you're a data scientist, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the term. So, what is the role of that in the topics related to skepticism?
Well, it comes up at a lot of layers. I think one of the main ones is the interpretation of data. So usually data is considered ground truth. Now, you can conduct a biased survey where, you only ask Republicans what they think or only ask Democrats what they think or whatever. So if you want to lie with statistics, that's quite easy.
Right. Or
But it's,
sometimes, of course, it's the way you phrase the question, right? Right.
oh
Two
yeah,
choices. Is Trump a great guy or is Trump a good guy?
yeah, exactly. What kind of results are we going to get? So, but if you start, so skepticism can be applied to that data collection process. Like, was it a good question? How was this information gathered? But if you have something more like, let's say, astronomical data, where there's no bias in the lens, there could be a software error that shows up in the data, but no one's trying to spoof aliens into the data, or at least that'd be a good conspiracy theory. Um, but in any event, like at that point, it's more a question of have you applied the right methodologies to the data? Is there something in your procedure that we should be skeptical of, and making sure that the conclusions you draw from the data are the ones closest to truth.
Okay, so that leads us right into the main thing I wanted to talk to you about. I've wanted to talk to you about this for years, literally, the missing 411 conspiracy theory.
Oh yeah.
Um, I'm sorry it took so long to get around to it, actually. The gang at Squaring the Strange just recently interviewed you and beat me to the punch. I listened to it, I said,
Scooped.
oh, but I said, I'm going to interview you about this anyway. So started about 11 years ago, and as
Mm-hmm.
far as I know, to date, there's been, I think the number is 10 books written on the
I think
subject,
so.
right?
Yeah,
And
and two or
three
three movies now.
documentaries, three
Yeah.
documentaries,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So for those uninitiated in this conspiracy theory, is it correct to call it a conspiracy theory, by the way?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so please explain what it is. What is missing 411?
So the missing 411 idea is that there are a collection of disappearances that all have very unusual circumstances and are therefore all linked, so that something mysterious is going on. It began really focused around national parks, and that in particular, people were going missing from national parks at an alarming rate, and has since broadened out to be essentially anywhere rural, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I've seen the latest names of the books like have separate state names on them. So, and there've been several documentaries, as I mentioned, and the
Mm-hmm.
last one had UFO in the title. What is
It's my
that
favorite
about?
of all. Yeah.
I,
Missing
I, I
411, the UFO connection.
was this in the thing before and I missed it, or is this something he interjected with this last documentary?
Well, it's interesting. So in the earliest days, David Paulides, who's really the George Lucas of Missing 411, the main driving force. I mean, he hasn't sold it to Disney yet, but
Yeah, but
rewind.
this is a wholesale creation of his.
Yeah, he's
Correct.
the guy.
This is not a grassroots thing that he took hold of. He made this up.
Yeah, or founder and discoverer, however you want to look at it. And in the earliest days, he stuck pretty firmly to a position of like, I'm just asking questions. I'm just saying it's mysterious. I don't know what it is. It could be Bigfoot. It could be aliens. It could be the simulation hypothesis. It's what I like to call a USB port conspiracy, that he's just saying something is odd. Go ahead and plug in your own solution. But there have been implications over the years that there could be a cryptozoological origin to some of this, and in the most recent documentary, a relationship to UFO abductions.
So these people that are missing under, he says, strange circumstances.
Right.
So what are the criteria for it to be a strange circumstance according to this theory?
Well, there is a list that David will read off. It's evolved over the years, but it's that people went missing and a search was conducted, and the person wasn't found in the area they were expected, or maybe they were found later in an area that had previously been searched. What else? That people cover more ground than is reasonable, that there's no way they could have walked the distance to where they were found.
The first thing, wait, that confuses me. So
Mhm.
somebody who's not missing is part of missing 411? They were recovered?
Okay, so three categories there. There are people who went missing and were recovered that still somehow made it into the canon. That's a little weird. Mostly children who couldn't explain their whereabouts. There are also, so very mysterious, right? There are also people who went missing and, of course, were never found, or at least have yet to be found, which is sort of the obvious category. But if there's a third, it's people who were missing and then their body was found.
Is there something odd about the body when it's found that he lists them in this group of people?
Sometimes, so one of the optional requirements is often these people are found uh, like disclothed, especially in cold climates where you would not think someone would be stripping down. Unless, of course, you've learned of the phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing, where people in the last stages of hypothermia feel a sensation of warmness that is not actually correct. It's your brain kind of in its last throes, and they start to undress because they feel warm.
Now, wait a minute. I'm sure that people who believe this are going to say you just made that up to so that you're going to throw cold water on this theory because that sounds ridiculous. Is that really a thing?
It is indeed, yeah, and has persisted. You would think that would kind of evolve out since it has a very natural and somewhat obvious explanation, but still comes up quite frequently, as do the fact that many of these mysterious disappearances happen around berries and berry bushes.
What? Any
Yeah,
particular kind of berries?
I'm just asking questions.
So they're in largely national forests and there are berries. That's really odd. Yeah, I don't know how to explain that. The word cluster comes up a lot.
Yeah.
So this is like, so what does that mean to you? What does that mean to David Paulides?
Oh, two very different things. To me, a cluster has a very mathematical definition. In fact, we did a whole season of Data Skeptic, like 8 or 9 episodes, all about the k-means clustering algorithm. So it has formal mathematical foundations, which initially I thought I could apply to missing 411. Turns out David really means that in a very colloquial sense of if you could put pins in a map and there are some pins in vaguely the same area, that's a cluster.
Like even if there's a dangerous formation there in a park where people could naturally go missing, that's still a cluster.
That would most certainly be a cluster. Yeah, if you have
There's-
multiple disappearances last seen at the same place.
So, okay, all right. So I'm sorry. Could you explain the mathematical meaning just, so a layman would understand it?
All right, let me think of the easiest way to do it.
Yeah.
It's imagine like you have you're looking at a map of like homes, and maybe some of them are apartments and some of them are commercial buildings and some of them are single family homes. And you'd like to know, like, is there groupings here that are logical? Like commercial buildings tend to be all together. You might say there's a cluster of those because their latitude, longitudes all have similar mathematical locations. And in fact, the average of those would be the centroid, the very middle. So you could say a cluster is defined by those points assigned to it and how distant they are from their common middle.
Okay. Yeah. So, and that's not what David means.
Not
Okay.
exactly, no.
Okay.
His is more like in the new documentary that there were three missing cases that all occurred in a forest near a river, roughly a mile from each other over the course of about 50 years.
It's just a little bit more loose than the mathematical definition.
A little bit.
So, how did you first find out about this? Did it initially seem credible, or were you a skeptic from the get go?
Well, I found out about it from paranormal sources. Like this comes up a lot and still does on a lot of the kind of like out there podcasts like Mysterious Universe and places like that, and has persisted for longer than some of the other, folklore that comes and goes. And when I heard about it, I didn't, reject it the way I would reject, a Venusian landing claim, which makes no sense to me. It actually was kind of interesting in that could it be that there is a serial killer operating in national parks? That's not an outlandish headline. There's weirder headlines in the paper today, I bet. And could it be that this independent guy discovered this pattern and found this serial killer and it's, a true crime story? That's a possibility. It just doesn't happen to be the world we live in.
So, all right. So, you looked into it from the perspective of data analysis, and how did you do that? How did you rule out that it is some unknown serial killer or big feet?
Well, first thing, I got David's book and I started reading through the catalog of missing persons cases and trying to put some metadata around that. So collect the age, the gender, location details. He doesn't consistently ask like a standard template of all of them, but it's a narrative I can pull information from. And just trying to categorize that to get a sense of what are these disappearances and what's common about them. One of the most striking results was how many young people, like under 9, go missing and are never found. Very sad, very tragic, but also fairly explainable to me. So I really looked for what I could put in that USB port conspiracy that would make sense to me, and there wasn't enough consistency. And most of these were really just unfortunate cases rather than anything truly mysterious. David kind of inflates them in the narrative. I remember one was a 78-year-old man who was lost while hiking alone during a blizzard, but you were assured he was renowned locally for his outdoorsmanship and details like that.
Hmm. Have have you come across anyone else who's done an analysis of Polites data?
Not anyone that's done anything formal. Not that mine was, this deeply rigorous analysis. I think the challenge is there isn't a database, or even if we turn the books into a database, they aren't very telling. These are true cases. David's not a liar. He's not making these up. He'll get little minor things wrong, like a person says they're 65 and they're 66, small errors like that. Who cares? But even if we had a more formal set of missing persons cases, like, okay, so what?
I did come across an article you wrote way back in 2017 for Skeptical Inquirer, an investigation of the missing 411 conspiracy. That I think that was published in print, if I'm not mistaken.
Indeed, yeah, I got
Right,
a couple over on the shelf.
August 2017. But it's also, if anyone wants it, they can Google that. It's also online for free.
Yeah, yeah, check it
So,
out.
so since you wrote that, that's way in the beginning. There's been all these other books published. You've had the 3 documentaries. Has anything changed your mind? Has there been any other information that says, "Oh, I really didn't think about that"?
Not really. I mean, there are some interesting nuances and tributaries. Like I spoke to some people from the National Park Service who were like eager to overshare. There's like a lot of interesting other tributaries you could follow about um, you know, how people view different things, and there are jurisdiction questions that come up where it's not clear, is it local police or is it NPS, and or Bureau of Land Management plays a role, and it's not really my topic du jour, so I didn't pursue that. But it was kind of interesting to see how complicated things get the more you zoom in and see another person's perspective on it all.
Yeah, as
Uh,
usual with things, that's true.
yeah,
So
Has
the
di-
one thing I recall reading about this online, maybe it was a Wikipedia article, was that it's difficult to get information from the National Park Service or any authority in the United States about people disappearing anywhere in one database.
right.
And that maybe feeds into the conspiratorial mindset. Oh, they don't have, or they don't give us this information.
Absolutely, yeah. He's played a heavy hand with that. In one case, one of his FOIA requests was slated to cost like I don't remember the exact amount, like $36,000. And he's of course guffawing, like, how could it be so much? You know, this is clearly an artificial roadblock you're placing in front of me. But I mean, think about it from these Rangers' perspectives. Like, they're not office people. I mean, I'm sure there's office people at the National Park Service, but it's not like this is a tech startup where they have hundreds of employees and are digitizing everything.
Right.
I mean, why would a connected system like that exist? It costs a lot of money and experience to operate that. I'm not surprised there isn't some national record keeping system, you know?
Right. And initially he was just talking about the national parks, and now it's expanded to pretty
Oh,
much
yeah.
people anywhere.
Kind of, as long as he says you fit the pattern.
Uh, so this is clearly of interest to, shall I say, the fringe-minded out there. The Wikipedia article has 1.2 million page views in the past 6 years.
Wow.
Million. And again, and the page is his personal page, David Politis, because there is no separate missing 411. There's a rather large section on this, and it's probably the bulk of his page. And I think this is what he actually is most known for. So
Yeah.
it's reflected in Wikipedia. But that's what people are clearly going there to read about, the missing 411 theory, right? So, and the page views peaked as high as 4,000 in a day in some cases. I assume this is when maybe a documentary was released or he was on some radio show or YouTube
Something like
channel.
that. Yeah.
Right. According to Google Trends, interest in Pilates is remaining steady. I just looked this up today. I thought, well, let's see what's happening with that. Just recently, it hit 75% of its max peak ever, which was in 2015. So it bounces up and down, but it's remaining high. So I saw the popularity of this in person at an event that I attended in 2018, I think it was,
Mm-hmm.
in the before time, before the pandemic
Right.
started, when we had group meetings and this was in a library. There was a local fringe group and I attended it. Well, the person running the meeting was all in. He had been doing his own research since the last book at the time came out and been investigating on Google searches other disappearances, and he had his own list. And he was reading them off and saying, look at this connection. And I was rolling my eyes, but everyone else in that meeting was bated breath, all in, believing it. And the thing he decided to pick on that time was this person disappeared from 666 so and so road. This was near Devil's Pond. This was Lucifer's hammer. It was like, oh my, he just connected it to the devil of Lucifer and things like that. You know, cherry picking out of the thousands of things he said he came across, those, and that proves something. I don't know what it proves, but it proves something.
There's a connection. Yeah. That is very much exactly the theme of Missing 411. The sort of almost tangible connection.
Everyone in that room, which was 40 to 60 people, if I recall, were all in, and some of them got scared during the break. By the way, first they talked about it, and then they showed us the first part of the first documentary. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But during the break before that, they were talking to each other because they all knew each other. I was the only stranger there. And it was like, oh, I knew my neighbor's son went to war and he was missing for 3 years. And then he came back, but I'm sure he was part of this group. Or, you know, something like that. It was like not even somebody who's missing still, but they were connecting it that way. And then one of the things that the leader of the group was talking about was he was quoting something from some of the books about how mysterious it was the way these people disappeared. And then he used an analogy like a crane coming from the sky and grabbing them. And then the people there are worried, whoa, can you walk with me to the car? Saying to their friend, because I'm afraid
Of
to
the
walk to my
crane.
car in the middle of the night here.
Scary.
Yeah. So he screened part of the documentary. I don't think it was the whole thing because we didn't have time I was so unimpressed. The
Yeah.
first the examples they showed, one was a young child, and these people were in the national park somewhere, and the kid disappeared. Like nothing was strange, and I'm surprised if you're making a documentary, why didn't you pick the best cases? And if this was the best cases, this is nonsense.
Yeah. That's one of the oddly compelling parts about it is you almost feel like you're not getting it when you look into these cases. Like what how come everyone else seems to be think this is mysterious? I'm just not seeing it.
Yeah, so I mean, clearly it's not everyone else. Good thing, but it is a
Right.
large group of vocal people, and we'll get to
Yeah.
vocal in a minute because I've seen that on Wikipedia. So first, let me mention that you, by name, are mentioned 3 times on David Paulides' Wikipedia article. I can read it quickly here.
Sure.
Kyle Polich, a data scientist and host of the Data Skeptic podcast, documented his analysis of Paulides' claims in the article Missing 411, that's the one we talked about, and presented his analysis to a skeptic camp held in 2017 by the Monterey County Skeptics. He concluded that the alleged unusual disappearances represent nothing unusual at all and are instead best explained by non-mysterious causes such as falling or sudden death crises leading to a lone person becoming immobilized off trail, drowning, bear or other animal attack, environmental exposure, or even deliberate disappearances. They got that all right?
Absolutely.
And one more paragraph. After analyzing the missing persons data, Polich concluded that these cases are not outside the frequency that one would expect, or that there is anything unexplainable that he was able to identify. The presentation was discussed in February 2017 article in Skeptical Inquirer, a publication of CSI. Polich concluded, I have exhausted my exploration for anything genuinely unusual. After careful review, to me, not a single case stands out, nor do the frequencies involved seem outside of expectations.
Exactly.
So that's pretty much the lone voice of dissent on the page. And as people might imagine, that has not gone over well with people who are fans of David and this
Sure.
conspiracy theory. Um, so I don't know. Have you ever looked at the talk page?
I have not. But I would love for you to share a few nuggets if there are any.
Yes. Okay. So you mentioned way more than 3 times on the talk page. So for those who don't know, every Wikipedia article has what's called a talk page. I think in other languages it might be called conversation or something like that. But in English, it's talk. It's right next to the tab that says like read the article. Most people don't even notice it because it opens up to the article and you just read it, right? But this is where the editors of that article discuss and argue about what should be in the article or what should not be. What's breaking Wikipedia rules? Should we add this? And it's also where people go to complain about things when it's a confrontational topic. So yeah, let me read you some of the juicy examples that concern you. There's been so many on this page, by the way, that there's what's called an archive. So I had to go find that. The current one has a little box which says you'll have to see here for the older version. So
Oh
some of
boy.
these are from the archive and some of these are from the current one. So this is from an anonymous editor from way back in August 2017. I guess it's right after your article. Reading through this article, Paulides is referred to as seeking after mysterious conspiracy theory explanations for common disappearances otherwise easily explained by science. But no examples are given of these alleged conspiracy theory explanations. And the same article states further that Paulides himself hasn't even given one. I gain the impression that this, the SI article, which I'm inferring because he just says that this is a vanity piece written to gain attention to some obscure self-proclaimed data analyst who writes for a magazine I've never heard of.
All right.
Skeptical Inquirer.
But to the earlier part, is that a legitimate complaint that just because David hasn't assigned the conspiracy, that somehow invalidates the? I don't
No,
get what they're going for.
and I'm not taking the time to read the responses from reasonable editors to these comments
All
because
right. Yeah.
people can go and look themselves now that I told you it's there, right? Yeah, yeah, because people off. That's not the way this works. Yeah, that's a comment with pointing then to obscure Wikipedia rules about things is often what happens. Yeah, links to things. So okay, next one, Ba Hunt, which is a dormant account, which is from a few months later than that first one, a year later, November 2018. What is a data analyst anyway? And can anybody declare themselves a scientist? I would ask an administrator, he's talking about Wikipedia administrator here, to review this change on this page, he means, as it seems to be determined to be a man's work based on the opinion of a so-called expert on data analysis, whatever that is. Is the prior post, in fact, that's what it says, must be a typo. In the prior post, maybe? In the prior post, in fact, Mr. Polich himself seeking self-promotion or Mr. Polides' expense? This is very odd. So, yeah.
All right.
Then there was September 2019. The Polish Skeptical Inquirer article, cited by the author's own admission, analyzes 3 pages randomly from Polides' series of books, describing this paper as, meaning the SI paper, as a data analysis is fallacious. So I don't think we ever described your article in SI as the data analysis.
Right, right. On that, what they mentioned there too was one of the more rigorous bits I did. I didn't want to cherry pick any of the cases and like find the worst, examples. So I took the book and a random number generator and picked some random pages and said, let me investigate
very cool.
those cases.
I forgot that.
And they were the most banal of examples. So at least with a random sampling, it's hard to identify anything truly mysterious.
All right, another interesting one from October 2019. It is clear Polich, in a hurry to dismiss Polides as pseudoscience, looked only at a very limited number of cases, missing out on a lot of cases which don't fit his, quote, easy to explain narrative. Now I believe there is no paranormal activity behind this, and am disappointed with Polides saying it to be so at the end of his documentary. Oh, that's interesting. But to say there are, quote, no good cases where so far explained events have occurred is just patently false. Good day.
Well, the good day was a nice way to conclude.
Let's see, from November 2018. This is Bahant again. I would contend that Mr. Polich is an unreliable source. He has no background in search and rescue, nor any experience in investigating missing persons case. There are many scientists, but that title does not imbue blanket credentials. And anyone can have a podcast. And by the way, citing a paper published in a skeptical newsletter, bad description, already smacks of bias and the need to dismiss the work. This is definitely an issue. Thank you.
Well, there's a kernel of truth there. It would be good to have someone from search and rescue or forestry or whatever come in and give commentary. That person certainly has a lens of looking at the world that I don't have. I think multiple lines of evidence will lead to the same truth.
All right, last one I'm going to read from Mickey Bishop from just July 2022, so not quite a year ago. And this is he's arguing, this is a long argument with another editor about the critiques on the page. And he's saying this about the other editor, not directly you. The big question is your conflict of interest. What's your connection with David Polides that you hate him so much that you're willing to spend so much time drumming up hate for him? Your buddies opened the door when they claimed to have all the statistical data by Kyle Polich, who is not a scientist, despite his big talk. You clearly hate David Polides. Why? And it goes on. And then it ends with, it's all but impossible for me to believe that you are a scientist. I think he's talking about the other person, the editor he's talking about. If you are, why do you stand with this lowlife, phony sleuths and favor debunkers rags like Skeptical Inquirer? I'm going to write Barry Carr about that description. A debunker rag like Skeptical Inquirer.
That'd be a good pull quote, yeah.
So last comments on that. That's all I'm going to read.
Well, it's the only rag that would have me, so that's how it worked out.
That's my pull quote. So that's from the Hayden Wikipedia. Have you received any blowback in the real world?
Not for a while, but yeah, we got a lot of like kind of bizarre, spammy, like FU kind of stuff. Just below a noise threshold, though. It hasn't been like that for a while.
So how did you get that? Were they sent to Skeptical Inquirer in your name?
No. Like I would get weird Facebook messages or weird emails, stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
The kind of thing that felt like it was one person, but like just weird, like, you're wrong, all caps kind of stuff.
So I think we've beat 411 to death. I did want to ask you about an AI subject because I know
Yeah.
that that's in your background. And precisely, what is your AI background?
Well, I'm not a scientist, I guess, is what we've learned today. I have a bachelor's and a master's in computer science, and I've worked in the field since graduating.
With specifically artificial
Yeah, with
intelligence
my master's
applications?
thesis is all about AI.
Okay. So, we're recording this in early March 2023, and ChatGPT is all over the place. There was even a 60 Minutes segment on it, I think it was last week, because of what happened with the one connected to Bing, I think it is, basically telling the person having a long discussion with it that, it loves him and he should leave his wife.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and
That was
they had
fun.
somebody representing the company saying, "Well, we've stopped that. It's not going to happen anymore." And from what I gathered, it was because that happened because the conversation went on for very long, and therefore it could change the output. And they've stopped people from being able to have very long conversations continuously. Was they said was the result. But the thing that wasn't addressed, which bothers me personally because I've been playing with it, is this, and I want your opinion on it. So if you say, "Tell me a story," and you say, and I've done that, right, with friends' names, tell us a story about, investigating psychics or haunted house. It comes up
Hmm.
with a nice story. It has our names in there. It makes up this stuff that we went to this place, investigated. It didn't change our mind. It all sounds almost like a person could write it. But of course, I said make up a story, so it doesn't matter that it's talking about stuff I didn't do. But I said, uh, do you know who Rob Palmer, the skeptic, is? And it didn't. Then I said specifically, Rob Palmer, the skeptic who writes for Skeptical Inquirer, as the well known skeptic. And it said, oh, yes. And it said, when I started writing for them, and da, 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 da. But then it
Oh,
just
that's
made
interesting.
shit up. Some of Rob's most popular articles are, I don't have the list here, but it listed 5 articles or so in quotes that were all have paranormal topics, like, are
Any good
UFOs
ideas for
real?
you?
Are ghosts real? And I did not write them, and I Googled those,
Yet.
and I got nothing.
You haven't
How?
written them yet.
Oh, so they've put psychic powers into the AI.
There you
That's
go.
what you're telling me.
Well, I mean, what we can say for, I guess it didn't end in a question mark. Was there more
Well,
to it, or
my,
did you
my
just want my
question
comment?
mark is you don't expect to be told bullshit when you ask a
Mm,
data driven question and it knows part of it. And then the rest of it is, let's use the word fake news.
yeah, yeah,
How is was this programmed this way? Because people are not going to know that. I knew I didn't write the articles, but if I asked it about you, oh, that's good. The computer just told me this. I'm assuming it got this from Google or Bing. It's like, I would almost not suspect that this was wrong. So now that I know it's unreliable and totally makes shit up literally,
yeah.
what is the story there? How was it programmed that way? Why was it programmed that way?
That wasn't an explicit part of its programming. That's just sort of a consequence of how it was trained. So at a very high level, it's trying to make predictions about what word should come next, and doing that in a very elaborate way that we could dig into, but more or less trying to form sentences that are similar to the trillions of sentences it's seen previously. So even saying, oh, you write for Skeptical Inquirer, that's now enough for it to kind of complete sentences that are seemingly appropriate, like saying, are UFOs real as a title? I mean, probably there's never been such a title. It's a weird title, but it's not off base. It's what you would get if you asked somebody to make up that story.
It wasn't, the problem was it wasn't clear that it was making it up, except it was because it was making a bullshit about me, right? It was making up stuff about me. If
Uh-huh.
I was just another person asking about Robert Palmer, there was no reason that they would have suspected that that was made up as opposed to pulled from reality, especially because some of the stuff was pulled from reality. So, yeah. So, all right, I guess I understand what you said. It's not designed to do it but that seems an odd design for a tool.
Well, we there will definitely be efforts to improve upon this. My suspicion is there will be a hybrid system that uses knowledge graphs and stuff like that, and data from Wikipedia and wikidata.org to have a probabilistic input that evaluates the factual nature, could even potentially cite its sources. Those are things we'll see coming out in the next few years. But the lesson for today and for the future too is we should all be skeptical of these outputs. You can't believe everything you read, especially not something written by AI.
I fear for the further reduction of reality, either in print or what people read into videos because they got it online. If they got it from this tool in its current incarnation.
Possibly. I mean, to take a more optimistic angle, I could say this is the turning point where the human race learns its lesson that just because it's on some website doesn't mean anything at all. You have to find viable sources that are well cited and all that.
All right. On that optimistic note, I think we can end the interview.
Sounds good.
I hope you're right. Thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.